Big case, and there was a plea agreement made in this case with the death penalty taken off the table. Joining us live tonight, we have a very special guest, Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer. Mr. Spitzer, thank you so much for joining us here on Court TV Live. Great to have you
Julie,
along
thanks
with
for
us.
having me. I'm happy to be here. What a day. What a
What
day
a day.
indeed.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And you all were in the courtroom for a long time today, that hearing. I mean, how many hours were you before the judge?
So we took over Sacramento State University, one of the ballrooms. It was the only place we could have this many people. Because the courts are so restrictive in terms of their size. So we had about 400 people here today. And we listened to 7.5 hours of it, recitation of, the 150 plus crimes that resulted in the guilty pleas to 13 murders and just an untold number of sexual assault and rapes and kidnappings. It was mind-boggling, quite frankly.
Bringing this case to a close, certainly no easy feat. And of course, a big decision had to factor in among all of the prosecutors. I know this spans 6 different counties in California. Talk to us about what went into that decision to make this plea agreement with him at this stage.
Well, for me, this was a no-brainer to seek the death penalty. If anybody should get the death penalty for a crime, it should be DeAngelo and all the, murders and rapes that he committed. And we voted unanimously early on to seek the death penalty. But when you really get into the evidence and you start looking at the number of witnesses that were dying, the amount of, because of the age of the case, I mean, we have to understand that it took 40 years to solve this case. And the great breakthrough was through the advent of genealogical DNA. And you know that we're building trees now to lead us to suspects where we have had cold cases that have gone cold for many, many years. So we had a huge breakthrough. And as a result then of collecting Mr. DeAngelo's real DNA, we connected him to all the other crimes. But because of the age of the case and the fact that it was getting more and more difficult to prosecute it, and also the age of the victims. So for example, in Orange County, I had 4 murders in Orange County, and I met with all the victims. And I wanted to seek the death penalty, and so did they. But they also understood that they would never see justice for the most part in their lifetime. And I think that's really, for me and for the victims, what became the most compelling. And that was, do we want to see a 10-year trial and 30 years of appeals in a state where the death penalty is currently in a moratorium? Or do we want some sense of resolution that we can get in our lifetime?
Certainly. Trials can be grueling, and sometimes it brings all that trauma back to victims when they have to give testimony on behalf of the state. So I want to ask you, please, Mr. Spitzer, had you have gone to trial, what would have been the biggest obstacle or obstacles you could have faced?
Well, I mean, we talked about the fact that evidence, witnesses were dying, and it makes it some cases you can't even prove that particular charge if you don't have a witness. The age, when you look at the age of the defendant and you look at the age of the victims, and because of the 40-year lapse from the time that this case was solved, from the time of the commissions of the crimes, there was just an overwhelming sense that it would be in the best interest of the victims and the public to get a resolution short of what would be probably a multiple-year trial. I mean, capital cases take at least 7 years to go to trial. And then the trial probably would have been a 2 to 3 year trial. I mean, there's that much information. So that's 10 years. And then you go through the appellate process, and everybody knows on capital cases, death penalty cases, there's just appeal after appeal after appeal. And the average appeal in California for a death penalty case was about 25 to 27 years. So there are victims from my county. In one example, the Harringtons. Their brother Keith was killed. Their sister-in-law Patrice was killed. And they're all in their 70s, the brothers. They would have never seen justice in this particular case. And that was what was most compelling for me, was that victims wanted some sense of closure. I hate that word, but for lack of, a better description, they wanted some sense of finality in this case.
Which is certainly understandable. Tell us, in all of your digging and all of the investigation that you went through in this case through all those years, did you uncover any motive for the killing?
When you listen to 7.5 hours of the description of each crime, right one after another, I can tell you, I'll share with you my personal sense. And that is that I literally was looking at the devil in court today. Here's a man who belittled parents in front of their children, who had a wife tie up her husband so while she was being so she could be sexually assaulted. A man who was not able to protect his wife and family during these sadistic, cruel, and just unbelievable acts. So when you look at the conduct, there's just nothing that explains it. In other words, he was stealing things and things like that. Was he sexually assaulting and murdering people for the trinkets, some of the gold, some of the money he was getting? I don't think so. I think he had a base, manipulative, sadistic part of his body, his DNA, whatever you want to call it, that made him just pursue evil for evil's sake. It was bone-chilling today to listen to all the descriptions of the crimes.
Wow, it really sounds like it. Just hearing you describe it to us, you're really
It was
taking us
awful.
there.
It was awful.
Well, thank goodness he can't prey on anyone else for the rest of his life. He'll be staying in prison. And I know August 17th, the victims will give their victim impact statements. District Attorney Todd Spitzer, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for
Joy,
all of
thank you so
your
much for
excellent
having me
work
tonight,
on this case.
Thank you. Thank you so much.